What is going on, New York Jet fans? Hello, everyone. Welcome back here into another edition of NY Flight Jets Talk. As always, I am your host, Connor Long, and joining me today here on the show, good friend of the program. You know him from the Jet Press. You know him from the Jet Press podcast, the great Justin Freed, giving us some of his time right here on this Friday evening. Justin, it is great to be with you, my friend. Since we last spoke, the season came to a conclusion, which I think is great for us as fans, us as analysts slash media members, because we don't have to talk about the tank race anymore. We don't have to talk about the Jets giving up, 40, 50 points on a weekly basis. Now we can just sit back, talk about some defensive coordinator candidates, and talk about the offseason. So it's great to be with you.
Of course, man. Appreciate you having me. The Jets gave us a little bit of news today. Finally, it's been a slow start to the offseason, and normally I feel like that's a good thing for Jets fans, but given how angry the fan base seems to be right now, I feel like any news is welcome news.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of fans are disappointed to see that, there haven't been any changes on the coaching staff. I saw a report earlier today from Zach Rosenblatt that I thought was really interesting, at least from a defensive perspective, that the primary reason the Jets haven't made any defensive coaching changes yet in the positional groups is that Aaron Glenn wants the new defensive coordinator to play a role in those coaching changes, and that's where we'll start the defensive coordinator search. Prior to today, there was only one known name, that the Jets had requested to interview, that being Durante Jones, the Vikings defensive pass game coordinator and defensive backs coach. They 7 more names added to that list. Matt Arujo, the Dolphins defensive backs coach, Priyam Banda, the Browns safety coach, DeMarcus Covington, the Green Bay Packers defensive line coach, former New England Patriots defensive coordinator, Chris Harris, the Jets interim DC Jones, who we just spoke about, Jim Leonard, who obviously is the fan favorite for the role, former Jet, currently the Broncos pass game coordinator, Wink Martindale, a popular name, Michigan's current defensive coordinator, and Jim O'Neill, a defensive assistant with the Detroit Lions, who Glenn overlapped with in Detroit. Again, Jones, the only known name who the Jets had requested prior today. Now 7 names added to that list. That was the Jets' first round of interviews, as they announced on their X page. Thoughts on those names? Anyone stick out to you in particular? And just assess overall, do you notice any trends, a common denominator in what the Jets are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, the name that immediately stands out is Jim Leonard, of course. This Jets job is not a very attractive job around the league, so I was not anticipating them bringing in any of the hot commodities, right, so to speak, on the defensive coordinator coaching carousel, the Al Harrises of the world, the Christian Parkers. But Jim Leonard is in that category, and they managed to get an interview with him. I can't say they brought him in the building, as others correct. It was a Zoom meeting, right? So they brought him in for a virtual meeting, but even still, I think it's surprising and impressive that the Jets were even able to get an interview with Leonard, he's been very selective with his interviews that he's taken over the last couple of years. Now, he might just be throwing a bone to his former team, of course. He Jets legend, obviously, played as a safety in some very fond years for the franchise. And he also overlapped with Aaron Glenn in 2014 when he was playing for the Browns. Glenn was the assistant defensive backs coach in Cleveland, I believe, under Mike Pettin. Might have been that year.
Who just retired from the NFL, by the way.
There you go. Also a former Jets coach right there, Mike Pettin. But yeah, Leonard would be just slam dunk, A+, obvious, amazing hire if the Jets were able to get him. I don't think they're going to be serious players for him. I think he's going to have much better offers elsewhere. He's already interviewed with the Cowboys for their DC opening. There's rumors out there that he might be going to New York with the Giants. But this is a guy who called plays as the DC at Wisconsin for 6 years, was an interim head coach at Wisconsin briefly, and has spent the last 2 years working under Sean Payton and Vance Joseph in one of the best coaching staffs in the NFL and the best defenses in the NFL. Has been the assistant head coach under Payton this past year. Would be a slam dunk hire. Just would be shocked if they were able to even. I don't even think he'll be a finalist. I think he will have better offers elsewhere. But outside of him, I do really like Durante Jones. That was the only hire going into today, as you mentioned. Kind of Brian Flores' right-hand man in Minnesota, and there's a lot that says that if Flores were to receive a head coach job elsewhere, that Jones would probably be the favorite to replace him internally in Minnesota. By everything I know, Flores swears by Jones, and he's not somebody who's been a DC before at the NFL level. He's 47, so he's been around the coaching ranks. Has just been never been given this opportunity. he's a high upside candidate that I would love if the Jets took a chance on. I kind of like Ephraim Banda, who's the safeties coach in Cleveland. Jim Schwartz coaching tree is always good to pluck from. He's spent the last years in Cleveland as a position coach. Also was a co-defensive coordinator at Miami and did a good job as the DC at Utah State. So he feels like a young candidate that's, I would say, pretty much ready for a defensive coordinator opportunity. And I think another team has also interviewed him. Might have been the Cowboys. I know there's at least one other team that has brought him in for an interview. Those are the names that stand out to me. I do think the most likely is Wink Martindale, and we can have that Wink Martindale discussion in a moment. Because I think you're not super high on him, and I'm not super high on him either. He just feels like the likeliest candidate. The phrase that I'm going to start using, I started using it today, is a marriage of desperation for both sides. Feels like both sides kind of need each other, which is leading me to believe that that's the route the Jets will go. I think there's worse candidates on the list. They could run it back with Chris Harris. I think Jim O'Neill would be a pretty brutal choice as well. But there's definitely better options as well than Wink Martindale. Would not be near the top of my list.
The two things I wrote about this early in the week for JetX, the two things the Jets must prioritize, the two traits in the next defensive coordinator that the Jets must pursue during this process as they look for their next DC after obviously Steve Wilks flamed out 15 weeks into the season for gangrene, AG's first defensive coordinator hire. The two traits they must look for: schematic philosophy and alignment with Glenn, and also a proven development track record from whoever they are looking to bring in. Those are the two traits and intangibles they need to be looking for. I mean, you start with the schematic philosophy and aligning with Aaron Glenn. The Steve Wilks hiring, that was the big issue. Glenn and Wilks have two completely different perspectives on how they want to play defense. Aaron Glenn is a very man-heavy kind of coordinator in the way we saw that throughout his tenure as the Detroit Lions defensive coordinator. Press coverage. Steve Wilks, meanwhile, is very much drop back into zone, let the play come to you. And I think that's one of the main reasons Wilks didn't work out. Now, when it comes to a development track record, this defense isn't very good. Many players regressed significantly under Steve Wilks' watch. Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, Quincy Williams was not great by all means in 2024, but he was certainly a reliable option in coverage this past year. Him and Sherwood, who just got a $45 million extension the offseason prior, they were among the two worst linebackers in coverage in this season by PFF's coverage grade. So they were awful. And, Wilks has to take responsibility for that. I think a lot of it was the scheme that they were forced to play in. So those are the two key traits that the Jets must look for. Al Harris was my number one option for this job. That obviously not a possibility. Look, he's not someone who was a DC before. I don't really care about DC experience when you're looking to find someone to fill this vacancy. But you look at the track record, there is, a clear pattern. Wherever he goes, he's inherited struggling secondaries and turned them into top units. He went to the Dallas Cowboys in 2020, took a bottom 10 secondary, made them top 5 instantly. Deron Bland, Trayvon Diggs had career years under his watch. Now this year with the Bears, another secondary that was awful last year towards the bottom of the league in interception total, now very, very high up on that list. Just 1 year of Al Harris over there. So he was my number one option. There's a clear trend of player development and proven success helping get secondaries on the right track. Among this list, a lot of Jet fans are going to disagree with me that Jim Leonard isn't my number one option. It's Durante Jones. That is who I'm rolling with because his scheme aligns perfectly with Aaron Glenn. This is someone with a track record of player development. Again, I can't preach that enough. Cam Bynum is the name that pops off the list right away as someone who he really, really, really helped develop throughout his time with the Minnesota Vikings. Again, Brian Flores continues to lean on him. That's for a reason. Flores is one of the best defensive coordinators in all of football. That is certainly a very promising sign. Again, aligned schematically with Glenn. Both rely on that kind of 4-3 style defense. I just really, really like what he brings to the table. He only had 1 year at LSU calling plays. The failure there, not entirely his fault. The pass defense, though, in Minnesota has been dominant throughout his tenure, ranked in the top 10 throughout all 3 seasons. In his second stint with the Vikings, 10th in 2023, first in 2024, and then obviously third this past season. Again, Cam Bynum, Byron Murphy Jr., two guys that he is credited with helping develop over there. So Durante Jones is atop my list. Now, to kind of tie this all together with Wink Martindale, I'm told there is a mutual interest between the Jets and Martindale. That was the word that was used to describe what that situation kind of looks like. Obviously, he was a part of the Jets' first round of interviews. I don't think there is a coordinator on this list I'd really like less than Wink Martindale. Maybe Jim O'Neill, you could say. I am super low on Martindale for a multitude of reasons. He just doesn't align. His scheme just doesn't align with Aaron Glenn, and I think that is going to be a huge issue. You saw a power struggle in a way between him and Brian Dable with the Giants. That's the main reason that they ultimately parted ways. Now he's about to, in this case, for the sake of this exercise, inherit, let's say, a Jets defense that was obviously terrible last year, that has a lot of missing holes, but the Jets have a lot of premium draft capital. Again, the main issue, though, is him and Glenn just see the game in different ways, and this just screams Wilks 2.0 to me, someone who's been around the game for a while, very experienced, schematically stubborn, and to be honest, his NFL defenses haven't been very good over the past 3 years. His past three defenses, the Ravens were a bottom 10 unit in 2021. The Giants in 2022 and 2023 struggled significantly despite that, inflated takeaway mark that they had leading the league in interceptions. And then, frankly, at Michigan, he struggled against elite competition against Oklahoma, Ohio State, Texas, all top 15 ranked teams. They've allowed over 400 yards per game, allowed a ton of points to them, over 30 points on average to ranked teams per game this past year. I just don't see it. Doesn't have the synergy with Glenn that the head coach used to describe what he's looking for in the next defensive coordinator at the Jets season-ending press conference. He doesn't entice me, Justin.
Yeah, he's definitely not near the top of my list. I put him firmly ahead of Chris Harris and Jim O'Neill, who I think.
Okay, yeah, I forgot about Chris Harris.
I just said this on the Jump Press podcast we were just doing. That's wrap it up, boys. It's over. Like that. You're picking a new head coach next year. I never want to speak indefinites because you never know what can happen. But I would be and boy, those would be the worst possible hires of all the guys that they have here. The most uninspiring names would be Jim O'Neill, who's not been a defensive coordinator at the NFL level in over a decade. Had two stints in DC with was the Browns and the Niners. Both stints went very, very poorly. He crossed over with Glenn in Cleveland, so they have history dating back to there, which is, it's probably a big reason that he was brought in. He has not held a coaching job of significance in 4 years since he was the defensive coordinator at Northwestern back in 2021 and 2022. And he was fired, did not do a good job there, was out of football for a year, and has spent the last 2 years as a defensive assistant in Detroit, which is the lowest you're going to get in the totem pole of coaches. So then elevating back to an NFL defensive coordinator somehow after what he's done in his coaching resume the last 10 years would be mind-boggling, to say the least. That would be an abject failure of a hire. Chris Harris, man, who knows? Maybe one day he'll be a DC option. You just optically can't bring him back.
No.
How bad the defense was under his watch. Now, I understand they were starting Jordan Clark and Colin Saunders and Samuel Womack and and I could go on. Of non-NFL players.
Trey Brown, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The list of non-NFL players that are playing significant snaps under Chris Harris. So maybe it's not all his fault, but just you can't optically just run it back with what they had last year. And also bringing back the defensive backs coach as your DC of a unit that just had 0 interceptions last year. You can't do that. But as for Martindale, it certainly would not be near the top of my list. We did a tier list. I put him at C tier. Maybe we're grading on a little bit of a curve here, but it's kind of just based on who they brought in, right? He's a guy who, famously blitzes an obscene amount, like a ridiculous amount. And one of the issues that the Jets had last year was they did blitz a good amount. They could not get pressure to save to save their lives. I believe at a point in the season, I don't know what it ended up being, finishing. We shouldn't even count the last 4. Yeah. They don't even count. But at a point in the season, right before they started objectively trying to lose games, they, I think, had like the 8th highest blitz rate in the NFL, but they were 31st on pressure rate on said blitzes. So they blitzed a good amount. Their blitzes were wholly ineffective. Now you would hope that Martindale, even with his archaic scheme, that's, it's probably a little outdated for the NFL now, you would hope that he'd be at least able to be a bit more creative than Steve Wilks and Chris Harris were with their blitz packages. But I would fear that it'd be a similar situation of the Jets blitzing a lot and not really not really having the personnel to do, because I don't think they have that defensive personnel to do that right now. Maybe they add some guys in the offseason, but and I also think it'd be a situation where, personality wise, the last two jobs Wink Martindale's had at the NFL level both ended in a mutual parting of ways.
Yeah.
Did not get along with the coaching,
Yeah.
with the other coaching staff. John Harbaugh and Wink Martindale had a falling out. Brian Daboll and Wink Martindale had a falling out. I very much think there's a world where if the Jets hire Wink Martindale, by week 7, Wink and Glenn are throwing hands on the sideline.
And Glenn is a very egotistical guy in that way, and also he's a defensive-minded head coach, so he's going to want to be hands
right. And then you have Joe Benigno on WFAN calling for Martindale to be the head coach by week 3. I very much think that's a very real possibility. Not just that scenario could happen, but I think the Jets could hire Wink Martindale. I think, again, I would call him probably the leader in the clubhouse based on everything we've heard right now. So yeah, I'm not I don't think it would be a disaster of a hire, but I certainly wouldn't be optimistic, and it wouldn't make me feel any better about the current state of the coaching staff. And I would probably be leaning towards the camp of saying, yeah, you're probably going into 2027 looking for a new coaching staff. And not that Martindale solidifies that, but it doesn't help me. It doesn't make me think the opposite direction.
No, I entirely agree. And another issue, kind of circling back to how the Jets couldn't get home on the blitz last year, another issue why they struggled so much and got beat on the blitz in a way so much is third down. They were one of the worst third down defense in the league, and Steve Wilks, for some reason, just couldn't adapt and wouldn't drop back into zone coverage. It was man on third down, and that is why they got burned so many times, and that is why I was firing for the Jets to fire Steve Wilks. I was calling for the Jets to fire Steve Wilks by week 10, week 12, because he was just leaving his players out to dry each and every single week. And look, I was very vocal. This defense isn't very good talent-wise. From week, after the trades, I believe, of Sauce and Quinn and Williams at the deadline, I didn't think it was a good defense, and they had already struggled all year long prior to trading away 2 of their best players on that unit. So sure, they were decimated of talent, but Wilks was just leaving them out to dry. You have a Jim Leonard in there, you have a Durante Jones in there for the final few weeks of the year, Brian Flores, someone like that, and they're more competent. They are not a top 10 defense, but they are in the 15 to 18 range compared to 27 to 32. That is how bad they were. I believe the entirety of that season. Are there any traits in particular that you're looking for in the next DC? I know I mentioned proven development track record, schematical fit with Glenn. Anything in particular that you're looking out for as you see these interviews flowing?
I'd prefer a younger candidate, a non-retread, I guess, for lack of a better term, which is why you're looking at someone like a Durante Jones as someone where it's okay, he has spent a lot of years, waiting for a defensive coordinator job at the NFL level. He had the 1 year at LSU, but it was a very brief stint. That's somebody that I would like. I really like Ephraim Banda as well, who's not somebody that I was very familiar with before the Jets brought him in for the virtual interview, but someone that the more I've looked into his background, I'm intrigued. Somebody who's worked 3 years under Jim Schwartz, who is one of the best defensive coordinators, not the best defensive coordinator in the NFL.
He's getting head coaching looks, by the way. 2 interviews now with the Browns for that job. That tells you a lot as well. Yeah,
100%. And Banda also did some good stuff as the DC at Miami and Utah State, so he has experience at DC. Has experience, I believe, calling plays as a defensive coordinator, and has been a good position coach under a good defensive coaching staff. That's somebody that I'd take a look at, right? Where it's 44 years old, man, you take a swing on someone like that. I think there's a much higher upside with a coach like that than a Wink Martindale, or, I don't want to lump DeMarcus Covington in there because he's a weird situation where he's still a young defensive mind. He's only I don't even think he's 40 years old yet. But he was the Patriots defensive coordinator last year, or 2024. Did not go very well. Did not have a lot of talent. So it's not, it's almost like a little bit of a Chris Harris situation where you're throwing your hands up and saying, what could he have done? But I would prefer a Durante Jones. I like Ephraim Banda, just a younger guy who has not been given the ball to run with yet. And is, that, because that's when you're looking at names like Al Harris or Christian Parker, there's a reason those are the guys, or even Jim Leonard. There's a reason those guys are kind of towards the top of that list, because the NFL kind of looks at them and they say collectively, these guys are ready for the opportunity. Let's see what they can do. That would be my preferred hire for the Jets, not a Wink Martindale or a Jim O'Neill, right? Who we've seen do it before. I'd prefer someone else, like, again, Durante Jones or someone along those lines.
Yeah, certainly. Now, when you talk about filling the rest of the positional coaches, their roles and the changes, additions, subtractions, offensively and defensively, are there any names potentially where you are interested in joining the squad as a defensive positional coach, offensive positional coach? I know, obviously, the Jets aren't going to fire Tanner Engstrand. That was made known in the report by Albert Breer, but the Jets are going to try to add infrastructure around him. Anyone offensively, defensively, coaching wise that intrigues you as a addition to the staff?
I'd be interested to see if a couple of the names that they brought in for these interviews, if they end up on the staff. And that's not just Chris Harris, who I think there's definitely a real chance that Chris Harris sticks around. They seem to really like him in the building. So maybe he just sticks around and gets demoted back to the role that he started last year with, the passing game coordinator, defensive backs coach. I think Jim O'Neill could stick around. Look, if he's a position coach, fine, whatever, right? That's not a problem. Just because he knows Aaron Glenn very well. They were together in Cleveland. They were together in Detroit. I'd love it if they could bring in an Ephraim Banda or even Matt, or I think it's Arujo is how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
That annoys me because I think it should be Arroyo. I think he just very much Americanized his name.
Yeah.
But someone like that who, Arujo, we didn't talk about him at all, but he was kind of the right-hand man to Vic Fangio for a year in 2023 when he was the DC in Miami. Spent the last couple of years the cornerbacks coach there. Very inexperienced, was a few years ago coaching at Yale. So he is not
doesn't have a Wikipedia page, by the way, which should say a lot. Yeah.
The only candidate on this list that does not have a Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Very much feels too early for him for a DC job, but look, Miami's probably going to have a new coach, the new DC there. They're going to probably have a new coaching staff there. So I'm not sure he's back in Miami. Maybe this is a situation where the Jets bring in Durante Jones to be the DC or Wink Martindale. And they're like, hey, we really liked Matt Arujo as a candidate.
Yeah.
We liked Ephraim Banda. Maybe they stick around as a DB's coach, as a cornerbacks coach, as your, whatever role they want to give them. I think that could make a lot of sense. Those are kind of some of the names that I think I'm looking at right now. Well, the offensive coaching staff, who knows? It's tough. I just have a new quarterbacks coach. I don't know who they'll bring in. Maybe they'll have a new wide receivers coach. They're going to make some changes. They're just waiting, obviously, until they get the coordinator situation finalized, and then they'll evaluate everything. It's been a slow process. I think we'll see some movement there pretty soon.
For sure. I actually have a lot of names that I'd be intrigued, and I'll start with the positional groups that I think need changes coaching wise. Defensively, linebackers and defensive line stick out to me. I kind of did a fun exercise earlier today over at JetX. I put together a 10-step plan to completely fix this defense. So it included coaching changes, free agent additions, key draft picks. So everyone go check that out over at jetsxfactor.com. I do have the Jets reuniting with John Franklin Myers. So I thought that would get some people excited on a Friday. I wanted to put that out there.
Hey, hire Jim Leonard. Bring back John Franklin Myers.
Getting the band back together, man.
Right. And you got the Darren Muji Denver connection.
Yes.
Let's go all Broncos.
Exactly. And then you could bring in Alex Anzalone, the connection to Aaron Glenn, and boom, there you go. You're getting the whole Denver and Detroit band back together. Hopefully that does not include Mr. O'Neill, though, and Jim O'Neill.
Yeah, it maybe Zach Wilson, he was in Denver last year in 2024. Maybe he doesn't have to be part of that.
Yeah, for sure. So a linebackers coach, the name that stuck out to me in particular, someone who is expected to be available this offseason after John Harbaugh's firing with the Baltimore Ravens. It's Zach Gore. Now, he had 2 mediocre seasons as their DC after Matt McDonald got the head coaching job with the Seattle Seahawks. And obviously those are huge shoes to fill. McDonald, someone who was a highly sought after coordinator. And obviously if early returns mean anything, the first 2 years he's been a great head coach over there in Seattle. Look, Orr is not a defensive coordinator. He is very, very young, still in his early 30s, someone who's a former player and then just suffered a really, really bad, spinal condition. So he had to retire, join the Ravens coaching staff right away. And again, now not someone the Jets should be interested for the defensive coordinator role, but certainly linebackers coach, a former linebacker, helped develop Patrick Queen over there with the Ravens. He's someone intriguing. Defensive line, Dennis Johnson. Why not come, and pluck another name right from that Ravens staff? He's expected to become available, expected to be vast changes over there. Obviously, after Harbaugh's dismissal, he was with Baylor for a couple seasons as their defensive line coach. The Ravens were very, very good against stopping the run. And now, granted, they had a lot of talent. Nnamdi Madubuike before he suffered that brutal neck injury that looks like it's going to have to make him retire, as sad as that is. But just a really, really good unit that he's kind of helped develop and has an experienced track record. It's hard to pinpoint like an exact, oh, I want this guy to be the Jets defensive line coach, especially when not knowing who the DC is. But defensively, those are the guys that I've kind of pointed out. Offensively, the two guys I've written out. Number one, Bobby Slowick. He is known for his time with the Houston Texans, 2 years as their OC, interviewed for the Jets head coaching job last offseason, ended up joining the Miami Dolphins coaching staff after being fired in Houston as a pass game specialist. That Texans offense his first year was damn good, and he helped develop CJ Stroud to become one of the best rookie quarterbacks in recent memory. And then the second year kind of all came crashing down. He's expected to be available because of Mike McDaniel's firing over there in Miami. Why not bring him aboard? Give him a similar title, pass game specialist, pass game coordinator, quarterbacks coach, something of that nature. Again, the Jets need guys with experience helping develop young signal callers. Slowick brings just that. And the other kind of young up-and-coming name who caught my eye is Mike Barakovi, the assistant quarterbacks coach currently with the Carolina Panthers. He was a quarterback over at Arizona State. Then he went undrafted, spent a couple years bouncing around the NFL, and then was a graduate assistant at Arizona State, spent 3 years as an assistant with the Cardinals, and then got hired by the Panthers ahead of the 2023 year with Frank Reich. Obviously, most of that regime flamed out. They had the 1-10 start, and Reich obviously fired in season. A lot of those guys, including Josh McCown, went one and done. Barakovi was one of the only coaches retained by Dave Canales, and he got promoted to assistant quarterbacks coach this year. Bryce Young had a career year after Barakovi's promotion, if that means anything. Just someone who's up and coming, who was recognized by Dave Canales. Those are the names that have kind of caught my eye. If you want to have any, express any thoughts on those guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Zach Orr would be a fun one. He was a very fun player with the Ravens. Unfortunately, had to retire early, but did a really good job revitalizing his career as a coach. And I know Ravens fans haven't been too pleased with his work as a defensive coordinator, but he's done. He's like you said, been a good linebackers coach in the past, which I think that's what you want to be bringing him in for instead. Is Berkovici? Is that I think it's Berkovich, whatever his name is, the guy.
Yeah, Berkovici. Something. I had it right. It's so weird. I said it right on the fly.
Yeah. What's funny about I didn't even realize he was a coach, by the way. I remember him as a quarterback at Arizona State. That's like I back in 2015 or whatever that was.
Burakovi, that's what it is now.
That's my memory of him. Yeah, they need another quarterbacks coach. He's an offensive assistant and assistant quarterbacks coach of the Panthers. That seems like somebody that you can, Bryce Young has developed at least this past year. I thought Bryce Young took a big step. So if you want to put some of that credit on him, then maybe you can bring him in. It's weird because it's so hard to predict what assistant coaches are going to be good.
Yeah.
It's kind of just taking stabs in the dark. We don't know these guys personally. We don't know the work that they're doing. It's kind of just reputation based and saying, okay, this guy has done good stuff here, or this position group is good, so that reflects well on the coach. But yeah, I do agree that linebacker coach, I'm assuming they're going to make a change there. Aaron Curry is the current linebackers coach.
Yeah,
its linebackers room was very, very bad. Both guys that both of their starters took a step back. Defensive line coach seems very, very likely to make a change there.
Had the connection with Wilks as well. That was one of the main reasons he was brought in, went one and done with the Bears. And also, I read something, I don't remember who it was from, but there was some issue between Washington and the players towards the end of the year. So that only adds to the justification as why it would be smart for the Jets to move off of him.
Yeah. So I think they'll make changes there. We'll see how much of the DBs coaches they change. Slowick's an interesting one because he was back 2023 was a hot commodity. As an OC, and then the offense really fell apart in 2024. The offensive line took a major step back. That did not stop the Jets from bringing him in for a head coach interview, which is very interesting.
Not even a wildest head coach candidate they interviewed.
Yeah, his stock had fallen quite a bit. As you mentioned, he was a passing game coordinator for the Dolphins this past year.
Specialist, not even coordinator.
Whatever it was. Yeah, he was not a position coach or a coordinator at all with the Dolphins this past year. So his stock has fallen a bit. Would be very interested to see what kind of role he plays because they had Scott Turner be that passing game this year. It does sound like, if we're going to believe reports, that the Jets want to bring in another more experienced offensive name, right, for lack of a better term, to kind of assist Tanner Engstrand as offensive coordinator. What that person's position title will be, maybe they're a senior assistant. I don't know. Maybe Slowick is a guy they want for that role, or maybe it's somebody who's a little older than Slowick. Slowick also, by the way, a New Jersey native, which I think that matters for Woody. I think Woody genuinely does care if you're from the Jersey, New York area. I think he kind of has a soft spot for those kind of coaches.
Yeah, and look, there are other names out there for sure. Pep Hamilton is someone I've heard come up. Not my favorite, but like,
yeah, he's been around.
Yeah, Doug Peterson is even someone that you can make sense out of in a way. He's someone I spoke about highly last offseason as, they could bring him in, they could bring him in, they could bring him in. But at the end of the day, I came to the realization, would Doug Peterson really want to take a job with the Jets?
Yeah, like if they brought in Doug Peterson as like a senior offensive assistant, cool, that's great.
Yeah. Would he yeah, exactly. Would he want to take that?
Yeah.
Slowick made sense to me because it would be somewhat of a promotion after he'd hit the open market. Same goes for Burakovsky. And then when you talk about kind of like other names, again, it's hard to predict. Charles London is someone, though, I would have to say the Jets should move off of him. Like, the hire made no sense to begin with. Made his name known as a running back, was a running backs coach. Minimal track record coaching quarterbacks. Not very inspiring. No connection to Glenn, and obviously this year did little to change that. So these next few weeks, though, is when we're going to see these changes come into place, interviews for jobs, things of that nature. So be sure to follow along. Thank you all for tuning in right here on NY Flight Jets Talk. Be sure to drop down below, smash the like button, hit subscribe. Follow Justin on Twitter at Justin T. Freed at the Jet Press. Read me over at jetsxfactor.com. Justin over at thejetpress.com. Justin, thank you so much for the time, my friend. You got any final thoughts here before we have the show, football related, non-football related?
Man, appreciate you having me on. Glad we finally got some news today to talk about. It's been a slow couple of weeks, but I think it's going to pick up here pretty soon. And then soon enough it'll be March. Soon enough it'll be free agency, and there will be a lot to talk about, I think, in the Jets world once we get to then. But yeah,
absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, man. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time. That'll do it for us, folks. Drop your thoughts down below in the comments. Smash the like button. Hit subscribe. I'm Connor Long. He's Justin Freed right here on NY Flight Jets Talk. And we're saying have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, however and wherever you are consuming this very podcast. And as always, JTS, baby. Jets, Jets, Jets. Peace out, folks.